Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Charlotte, North Carolina, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open to be a part of the program. It is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Evans. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah, and I'm busy practicing away for all the talks at Southeast Linux Fest coming up.
Oh my gosh, it's going to be a really fun weekend. More to come on Southeast Linux Fest. So, Steve, you and I had one heck of a night about a week ago.
Yeah, you might say that, and by that you would say both of the wives looked at us and said, "Why does the internet not work?"
And how long will it be? So we'll back up to, I think, last Tuesday. You said, Noah, I have devices dropping off my Wi-Fi network. You, as a professional who installs Wi-Fi for hotels and hospitals and clinics and lawyers' offices and so, you might know something about that. Could you come down and help me troubleshoot my Wi-Fi? To which I said, yes, I'll be there on this day. So I pack up the wife, I pack up the kids, because if we're going to Steve's house, they would kill me if I didn't bring them with. So pack up the family. And then literally on the way out of town, also grabbed our lead installer from Multispeed because his girlfriend had an impromptu event down in Sioux Falls. So she's down there. And so figured, well, he can get a free ride. So we head down to Sioux Falls. We get to Sioux Falls. And we go to start working on the Wi-Fi problem. And really early on, it was we tweaked a couple of things and thought, we'll see if this fixes it. Short answer, spoiler alert, it didn't. And so we instead pivoted to installing a doorbell. Now, not that was the most challenging thing in the world, but it was kind of nice because I had the guy, the wire ninja, Kenny Schmidt, who's our lead installer, and deals with a lot of the... I get to do the big picture stuff these days, Steve. I go in and go, yes, we'll put a camera here, and yes, we'll do that there, and yeah, and then I say, Kenny, make it so, and then he goes through with our team and goes and puts all the things in. So it's great. And I said, hey, if I give you a ride down to go hang out with your girlfriend for the weekend, could you come and help me snake a wires? Oh, of course, no problem. So he shows up. And I let him do all the fun parts so that in the event that we did go bust through your floor or through a wall or something like that, I can alleviate myself of responsibility, as one does. So but that part went really well. And we got the doorbell online, and I think in short order, short of just having to break into a Windows box to reset some stuff, largely that was the easy thing. And then you had a doorbell up and running. And my gosh, Steve, if you can you talk a little bit about that Reolink doorbell? That thing has a fan-flippin-tastic picture. It's so sharp.
It is, and you know what? It works so well. Aside from the fact that at least mine, the one that I have, had the web UI disabled by default, which is why we needed a Windows box. That's a whole other story of, like, I couldn't remember this VM Windows password and whatever. But once we kind of skirted around that issue, we basically just connected, and then one of my fears was that using the app meant that I was going to have to hook it up to the Reolink cloud. That is not the case. The app just simply, you gave it the IP address or the URL for the camera on your network, and it connects over port 9000 and allows you to toggle some stuff, and that's it. So we turned it on, plugged it into Home Assistant, and it has been fantastic. Just the quality of the picture is really, really good. My kids still haven't grown tired of it. They come into the office, Dad, look at the camera. And then they run outside and do something crazy on the camera. And then I've got it hooked up so that when somebody pushes the doorbell, it takes a snapshot and sends that to our Telegram channel for Home Assistant notifications. And the kids love seeing themselves make ridiculous faces on this.
I was super impressed with the quality. I thought it was really fantastic. And truth be told, as far as the whole Port 9000 thing, if a person really wanted to, chances are you could crawl in there and watch what commands are being sent to that doorbell. And I'm quite confident somebody could come up with an open sourcey way to effectively, really what you need to do is just toggle an option, right? And so it's like, if a person cared enough, you could probably get it done without the app. It's just easier to just, you go toggle it one time and then you don't need it anymore. And let's face it, that's part of the world we live in, is every once in a while you got to fire something up to toggle a thing. But then past that, works natively in Home Assistant. I think you're looking at Frigate in the future.
Yeah, so I thought, so just back up to the Home Assistant integration, you can absolutely toggle these options from Home Assistant once it's connected. The challenge is that the Real Link stuff ships with no password by default. And if you try and connect a device to Home Assistant with no password, it doesn't let you. Like, it throws an error saying you need a password. And so that's why we needed the box. As for Frigate, I thought, I watched Noah the last couple of years come to self and be like, I have a project and I'm just going to sit down and work on a project and people will watch me. And so I thought it might be fun to sit aside and see who wants to sit around and play with Frigate on a network that's got 6 or 7 cameras. So I thought I might try and tackle some of that at self.
I am there. I think that would be fantastic. Yeah. So that was the fun, easy part, Steve. That was the part that went well. That was and to be fair, it was the easier of the things that we set out on our task list. But so that part went well. So then we circled back. Now, mind you, we got there. I finished Critical Thought like noon, so we probably got there 12:45, 1 o'clock. So about 3 o'clock, we're wrapping up with Doorbell Project, and we start to move back to Wi-Fi. So we sit down at Steve's computer. We look. The Wi-Fi has not gotten better. In fact, if anything, it's gotten worse. Now, the devices that we're dropping off for a couple of minutes, every hour or so, are now like every 10 minutes, they're gone, right? And so, like I say, if anything, we've gotten worse. So we decide to start digging into it. Well, I am going through the way that I would typically start from the beginning, work your way out, right? Start from the router, work your way out. So I'm thinking, well, is it a trunking thing? Is it this? Is it that? And so as I'm working through that process, at some point, I changed the management interface to what I believed was the VLAN that all the management stuff was on. Obviously, it was not, because shortly thereafter, we lost access to the core switch. So at first, I look at Steve and I'm like, no big deal. I'll go down there, I'll reset the switch. Well, the controller will find it, we'll readopt it, it'll pull its config back in. Easy peasy, not a problem. So I go there, and I take my trusty paperclip, which got a lot of use that day, by the way, and I press and hold a button, and I see all the blinky lights, and I think, great, it's resetting. And I wait, 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 and it never does come up in the controller. And so by this time, kids are getting hungry, so Steve's like, well, I'll go put that fire out. So Steve goes to handle feeding children so they don't starve to death. And I'm still sitting there. I'm like, why is it not right? And slowly it starts to occur to me. And as I'm coming in the kitchen going, hey, Steve, like, he's already 5 steps ahead of me. He's like, yeah, you're going to have. So the problem is, to get the switch to talk, it has to be VLAN aware, because the controller sits on one specific VLAN, right? So now we have a problem. We've got a trunk coming in, but we have no switch port configured for a trunks. And the switch in question has no way to reach its controller. So the easy thing to do here is to go take the VLAN, which, in your defense, at least you didn't have VLANs implemented at the server level, right? So at least the VMs aren't being broken out by. So you had a physical cable, that is to say, that is on the same network as the controller. Problem is, we had no DHCP, nothing like that. So, okay, not the end of the world. At least we have a way to get the thing back online. So plug that cable in. You repurposed a little D-Link router, which, by the way, if you want the worst, most terrible administrative interface known to man, those little D-Link routers, it has some really great features, like it juggles the clients around in the UI, so you can't keep track of what the last ones were. Also, they all show up as unknown, which is really helpful. I found that really helpful. And so as we're digging through this abysmal interface to try to but we're handing out IP addresses, which is a step in the right direction, about 45 minutes later, we figure out this switch is not pulling an IP address for we can't figure out a reason as to why. So that was my first indication that, like, something is not right. But maybe I'm not resetting it correctly, maybe something. So Steve is, I think at that point you were on your phone. You later upgraded to a laptop, but you're on your phone, which is probably the second time that month it got used. I'm on my laptop. Actually, I'm on my daughter's laptop. I'll circle back to that. I'm on a laptop, and we're Googling, and we're DuckDuckGoing, and we're searching, and we're doing all the things. we cannot figure out how to get the switch reset or to get it to take an IP address. Eventually, we conclude the switch is reset, but it's not getting an IP address, and we can't figure out why. So my laptop, this beautiful Dell 7330, it's a great laptop. I really like it. It just has one critical flaw, and that is there is no Ethernet cord. And so that posed a pretty substantial problem from the standpoint that I had no way to plug into the network. So I go upstairs and I go, hey kids, who has a laptop with an Ethernet port? And my daughter goes, oh, I have one of those. And so she hands me her X240 or whatever it is, X270. Now, side tangent, she recently lost her internet privileges. So Steve, you kind of run your house with an iron fist. I kind of have like a wet floppy latex glove, I guess wouldn't be like a comparison, right? But I get sick of, it's just like we're on the internet, we're past our bedtime, we're not listening. And so every time I'm putting, I'm trying to put a boundary in place, she's stepping over, and eventually I'm like, okay, you're done. So all the technology went away. And so as it started to slowly come back, it came back in the form of a laptop reloaded with Endless OS. And I was like, here, all the stuff you need is on the computer, so you don't need the internet. When you can be content and follow the rules without internet, then come back and talk to me and we'll talk about putting it back on the internet. And to her credit, she has dug all in. She's learned of all the games. She's taken advantage of the little teaching things that are on Endless OS. She figured out how to install Flatpak so that she could get Mind Test running and play with her brother via a wired connection, which I kind of let slide because it's not technically the internet, it's a LAN. And they were even good enough to like break it off and so anyway, so she has this laptop and it has a wired Ethernet jack. However, can't install any system tools, so we couldn't install a DHCP server. There's just limitations, right? But at least it has an Ethernet port, so we're able to kind of move forward. So we're going through and we're working. And here's the thing, and I feel like some people will understand where I'm coming from with this. When you get into that priority one system down mission mode, at least for me, I can't think or focus on anything else. I have to do that and that alone, right? And so a few different times, Steve came down, and I think eventually her wife came down. They're like, man, don't you want to eat? Because we started like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're approaching 10 o'clock. It's like, okay, we're well past dinner. We're well past, my family, we've still got to drive home, but we're focused on and like I'm in mission mode. And Steve, I think at one point, Steve, you're like, is your wife? I'm like, nah, she gets it. She gets it. She's been married to me for a long time. She understands. She knows this face. She knows this situation. She gets it. So she knows I'm in mission mode, and in that thing, we'll leave when it's done, when the thing is fixed, when everything is back up and running, and the client is happy. In this case, when Steve is happy, and Steve has no internet, right? Which is a problem because you work on the internet, so there's that. So we're trying to do it, and eventually we get to 10 o'clock, and I'm out. Like I got nothing in the pipe. I got nothing coming down the hill because at that point we were able to SSH into the switch. I think we even got it to adopt, but we could not get it talking on the trunk port. And no discernible reason as to why we couldn't get it talking on the trunk port. And at one point, Steve asked me, he's like, what would you do if you were in a client situation? And, I'm 80% focused on what I'm doing and 20% kind of responding. And I'm thinking, well, I would go get other switches, right? I'd go get other things to try to supplement. But a lot of those options aren't there. I don't have a spare US or 16 port Unify switch to swap it in to see if that works. I don't have another brand switch that we can use to do some investigation to see if it's passing traffic. We can't do any of that, which is effectively try it or try it again. So ultimately we decide there's no way we're going to be able to fix this at Steve's house, at least not that night. So we fall back to your old 8-port switch, which really isn't an ideal solution because it means you had to forego another like 4 or 5 devices because there was no longer enough PoE available to power those things. So you're like, yep. And to be fair, when I'm doing that for clients, right, I've been sworn at. I've had things thrown at me. I frequently get yelled at. Like, people are not happy when things don't work, right? And so you're typically troubleshooting under that. I look up at you and you're like, no, I get it. I've totally been there. I expected this. I thought this is how this. I'm like, geez, wow, this is something else. So eventually it winds up that, okay, we're going to take the switch back to the shop and we'll do some further investigation. Also in there there's a really nice server with 64 gigs of RAM and some other things. So, okay, really cool. So we get that all loaded up. We get back, and the entire drive back, I am thinking to myself, God, I hope there's something wrong with that switch. Because if there isn't, it's a massive ego bust to me, right? Then I have to admit I'm just an idiot and did something really dumb. And so we get it back to the shop, and we put it on the test bench. We start working, and within a few minutes, it gets an IP address. I'm like, oh no. I did something, right? But then we look a little bit further, and it turns out half of the switch ports are just, they don't pass traffic. They light up, you get link lights, they show up in the controller, you can configure them, all the things, but they don't pass any network traffic. And so, yes, there was something defective with that switch. So the switch is now in the RMA process and going to get refunded, and presumably a new one will show up. However, Steve, we're back to square one. You have a Wi-Fi problem and you need some help.
Yeah. So a side note, after all of this up and down, I'm sure most people know that Zigbee runs on the 2.4 gigahertz network, and the primary driver of this problem was any client on the Wi-Fi that was 2.4 gigahertz. They are the ones that drop off intermittently. The 5 gigahertz is fine. So we're tinkering around with this. We even switched out an access point or two. There's a little story. We can talk about that itself if you want to go into my little story about known quantities and stuff like that. But suffice to say that a bunch of my Zigbee stuff went bonkers during all of this tinkering around on the 2.4 gigahertz network. And so the stuff that should have remained independent of the Wi-Fi problems ended up having problems like door sensors weren't working, and various things, temperature sensors, which caused all kinds of automations to kind of wig out. The bright spot here was the Z-Wave stuff all continued to work, which gave my wife the false impression that everything was working, because the mission critical stuff at our house is Z-Wave, and so she'd walk in and like Home Assistant's doing its thing, just talking to the Z-Wave stuff, and everything's working normally. So it was one of those, yay Z-Wave, Zigbee, you continue to fail me yet again.
So a short note. So this is right after literally seconds after we walked through Steve's front door. And sometimes, you ever have a thing, Steve, well, you probably don't but for me, stuff comes out of my mouth, and then every once in a while, I kind of tune in and out. I drift in and out of what I'm saying, and then I hear it. And some of the stuff I agree with, and some of it I do not. And so out of my mouth, I rattle. I brought this access point, so we have a known quantity. And Stephen is, backstory, immediately preceding this. So Kenny is sitting in the vehicle when we're driving in, and I'm like, yeah, one of my favorite parts about Steve is he's incredibly direct and incredibly literal. So like, if he says something, he means it. And if you don't have to guess, like some people will say, like, is everything okay? And they'll say, yeah, I'm fine. And really what that means is I'm very angry and upset with you because of X, Y, and Z. But they disguise that under the words I'm fine. And then you have to do all sorts of psychic dissection and forensic investigation to figure out what they mean. I'm like, and that's my favorite part about Steve. He'll just tell you right to your face. You're wrong. You're right. This, that, the other. So I walk in and I fire off, yeah, I brought this known quantity, a brand new access point from Unify. So we have a known quantity to test against. And Steve goes, how is that a known quantity? You haven't even opened it. I'm like, right, I guess I don't know anything about it. And then Kenny goes, yeah, you don't even know if there's an access point in there. There might not be. I mean, we've never opened it. So, yes, I learned something about known quantities.
Well, just like this switch was brand new, right? The one that we are tinkering around with. And so it's kind of the case in point. You take it out of the box, you put it on the shelf and say, go, do things. It should be fine. Because when we were starting the Wi-Fi troubleshooting, we didn't even consider the switch until much later, right? And so it's the same thing with your access point. Could be working perfectly well, but we don't actually know. So you could have just brought me a broken thing and said, well, it doesn't work on the broken thing that's new out of the box, so it must be something else.
Right. So anyway, it is a true pleasure to be able to work with you from the standpoint that you don't get hot and bothered under the collar. You understand how troubleshooting and that things don't always go as planned. But again, we're kind of back to square one. So I'm bringing out all the guns. So my second trip down, which will happen, I guess, as soon as we get back from Self and the switch arrives, but we're going to bring a Spectrum analyzer. We're going to go look at one other thing. And it was actually my wife that caught this. So she was working at Steve's kitchen table, and one of the things she noticed was with her phone hotspot, she couldn't connect to it. Like, it worked fine in the hotel, worked fine out in the car, worked fine on the way home, but for whatever reason, sitting inside of Steve's house, her laptop wouldn't pair to her phone. Indeed, mine had a similar issue. And so now it's got me, now I'm really down the path of what kind of weird interference is happening and on what frequency is that happening and how do we maneuver around that? And in order to do that, we're going to have to use what's known as a spectrum analyzer. And what that does is it will show us the entire range from like 800 megahertz to 5 gigahertz. And we're going to look at everything. We're going to see every little device that's making noise and on what frequency they're doing so. And we're going to figure out what the problem with Steve's Wi-Fi is and we're going to fix it. And this time we're not going to bork a switch. So I was glad it was a very interesting thing. And the reason I bring it up on the show is I feel like anybody who has troubleshot something that is critical in nature and is under pressure to do so and get the job done will understand the helpless nature of, hey, I'm trying to do this thing and I'm missing what I feel like are the critical tools and paths that I need to be able to get the thing done. And that brings us to our question. I'd be interested to hear from you on this, either at 855-450-NOAH or live at AskNoahShow.com. My question to you is, when you're looking at things like controller-based switch configs, do you see any rationale for, or let me phrase the question this way. When do you see the proper rationale for it's okay for this thing to have this central point that everything happens through? Or when do you say, I want a fail-safe way into the thing? Because one of the things you'll notice on the Ciscos and the HPs of the world is they will allow you to, and to be fair, the Unify higher-end Pro segment, they have console ports on them. So worst case scenario, you plug a serial cable into it and you open up you open up your terminal emulator and dump all of the serial data into Minicom, and whatever the problem is, as long as the device is physically starting up and running, you can see into the device and start to ascertain what's happening, what's not happening, can I pass traffic, can I not, those sorts of things. And so largely I'm sharing this with Steve while we were troubleshooting this, Unify made some changes to their controller that didn't allow you in the latest version to turn on the 24-volt passive PoE, which is a problem because it's their own little proprietary version of PoE. And so we had a car dealership that has a bunch of wireless links to connect their buildings, and we updated to the latest version of the controller, and all of a sudden we can't toggle this thing on and off, and our nano beams go down. It's like, well, now what? Like, I'm helpless because I want to toggle this feature on, and you remove the little button to do so, and there's no other way around this. And so then you end up shoehorning all sorts of cockamamie, hacky, cowboy ways to get the job done just because it has to function, and none of it's really ideal. And so largely kind of where I've landed is for stuff that is like that last mile thing. So for example, you need to connect 16 access points. Makes all the sense in the world to use the Unify switches. You want to connect a bunch of cameras, or you want to connect a bunch of endpoints. Like those sorts of things, I think, make all the sense in the world. I'm starting to reconsider when you're talking about like the core of the network, the central thing. How important do you think it is to have the simplest form of an idea, right? And so oftentimes when something becomes complex, it is that way because it isn't an idea that has had enough time to elegantly slim down to something super elegant and simple. And one of the things that I appreciate about your home network, Steve, everything is elegant and simple, right? Your file system is just a file system sitting on a box. Your servers are just basically the bare OS, and then you do things in the I don't say simple in a pejorative sense. I mean simple as in there is no unneeded complexity to it. And so I wonder what the audience would say, or what you would tell me as a listener. Where would you say, yeah, no, I don't think that's a problem at all? And maybe you would say, well, just pay more attention to the changes you're doing in the controller before you push them down, idiot. That's a perfectly valid response too. But whatever it is, I want to hear from you at live@asknoahshow.com or at 855-450-NOAH. Where do you see the value in the ability to locally control devices, and or where do you say that's okay? And granted, this is the first time I think I've ever been super bit by a switch, in part because the switch part of it was dying, and so that we were never going to get it to work. It wasn't a matter of trying or thinking our way around it. But where I have seen this fail catastrophically is people who virtualize their router appliance. And it typically goes like this. We can't get to the internet. Okay, let me VPN in. Oh, I can't get in either. Okay, what's the, and then as you start digging into it, you realize, oh, there's a problem with the VM, or even worse, the vhost that's running the VM. But now there's no workaround because the router is effectively contained inside of this dead box, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so for those reasons and those reasons alone, I started, we don't virtualize, even though we could, we don't virtualize the router appliance. It's always a separate little box that's connected to the internet, because if I can get into the network, I can live to fight another day. If I can't get that far, at a minimum, I'm driving there. And worst case scenario, I have to go find, instead of just any old box that has 2 network cards, I have to find something with enough oomph to replace their virtual host. So I'd be interested to hear the audience's thoughts on that. What do you think? Where do you think that line is? The other conversation that came up, Steve, that I kind of wanted to pick your brain, Kenny and I made a joke about Harbor Freight, and you're like, well, this is Harbor Freight you speak of. So Harbor Freight is God's gift to cheap tools. They have the cheapest stuff known to man. Some of it is okay. Some of it is cheap Chinese junk, but all of it's cheap, right? And so there are 2 purchasing methodologies. The first methodology, which you seem to be a fan of, Steve, is buy it for life. Invest in good quality things one time, take good care of them, and they will last you the rest of your life, that sort of thing. The Harbor Freight model is you buy it once and maybe it lasts you 10 minutes, maybe it lasts you 10 years. You don't really know. What you do know is it's going to be super cheap. And I'm curious if there's any room in your mind for, yeah, I could see that model. I think that makes some sense.
I don't know. As somebody who does their best to be a conservationist, like Noah can tell you, I've got water barrels all over my property that are capturing rain and stuff like that I use to water the garden and the lawn and stuff. The idea of putting energy into manufacturing for something that's going to fall apart while you're using it the first time, I don't know.
So you're not sold, and I don't blame you. In general, I agree with you. I think where there's some value in the sometimes cheap is good enough. I'll give you one example. They make these cases called Apache cases. Now, they're Pelican ripoffs. Are they as good as Pelicans? No, they're not. However, are they held to the same watertight and durability standards as Pelican? They do. They drive the same trucks and the same weights and all those things over. I would tell you where they fall down is in the hinges. So if you're going to ship something and the thing that you're shipping is very, very expensive and you want to make sure it's protected and stays inside of its protective box, you should buy a Pelican all day long and twice on Sunday. Where I think the value in the Apaches, which are about half the cost of a Pelican. So a Pelican, a Pelican 1510, which is the 22-inch standard Pelican equipment case that places use. If you buy it from Pelican, it's about $200, a little over that. The Apache version's like $90, so it's like half the price. And where I find tremendous value in that is the Chinese are great at ripping off Pelicans, so it's the exact same dimension. So all of the little inserts and doodads that work inside of a Pelican 1510 will work in the Apache equivalent. However, the hinges and the latches are not as good on the Apache. So I would never, ever, ever in my wildest dreams ship anything in an Apache case, because I'm quite confident it will show up busted, and or half the stuff is going to fall out when the things come open. So I just wouldn't do it. But for storage or for things where I don't need the true protection and rigidity of a Pelican case, but I want to have everything kind of a standard size, I think that makes sense. Every once in a while, there'll be some special tool or special device that I need to use, and I don't want to invest it for the long haul, so I'll use Harbor Freight to do that. And that's where I think there's some value. I'm wondering if I'm selling you on it, or if you're hearing me and you're like, listen, dude, I don't like investing money in things that I know are disposable, particularly when there's things that I could invest in that don't have to be disposable.
Yeah, you're not going to sell me on this. Like, so for example, I bought a hammer drill just to put up the plywood that holds all of the switching gear on the concrete wall in the basement. And I thought, I'm never going to use this again. But when I looked at renting it versus buying it, it cost me an extra $40 or something like that to buy it. And it turns out I just put a closet on top of a concrete floor, and I used my hammer drill. It sat in the closet for 2 years, and I literally thought I'd never use this again. But I don't know. I can't do it.
Well, and then we put a thing in on the front of your house, and we used your hammer drill to drill through it anyway. So I can definitely see where you're coming from, 100%. I don't know. Again, this would be an opportunity for you, the listener, to write in live at AskNoahShow.com. I'd be interested. What do you think? Do you use Harbor Freight, and if so, for what?
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of June 2nd, 2024, here's the Linux and open source news. The open source editor Flowblade has released version 2.16. Nitrix 3.5 has been released. Chaos 24.05 is out. Linux Lite 7.0 is now available. The GNOME team has announced the release of GNOME 46.2. Wayland 1.23 is out. And Linux 6.8 kernel has reached the end of life. The Linux user share on Steam has broken 2%. Linux Mint will start disabling unverified Flatpaks by default. And NVIDIA has announced that RTX Remix is going fully open source. In security news, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, has added a security flaw impacting the Linux kernel to the known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, citing evidence of active exploitation. Tracked as CVE 2024-1086, the high-severity issue relates to a use-after-free bug in the netfilter component that permits a local attacker to elevate privileges from a regular user to root and possibly execute arbitrary code. Lilac Squid APT employs the open-source tooling QuasarRat. The previously unknown threat actor uses tools similar to those used by the North Korean APT groups, according to Cisco's Talos. And antivirus company Kaspersky has released a free Linux virus removal tool. Lastly, in open source AI news, Llama FS leverages Llama 3 and analyzes files, extracting their meaning and context and organizing them according to that context.
In my effort to do more music production on Linux, I've started to look at what I would describe as minimum viable drum set. So a lot of you know that I play drums as a musical instrument, and I've wanted to do that on Linux and have so far been unable to do that. And really, as part of it is I just haven't really looked into it until now. And I came across a device or a piece of software called Hydrogen. You can learn more at hydrogen-music.org. It's a Linux-based music production, and I'm hoping what this will allow me to do is the ability to play drums anywhere. So it uses pattern-based sequences. So basically, if you have ever used one of like the 802 sequencers where basically you get 16 blocks and then you can place a snare or bass drum or hi-hat or whatever inside of every one of the blocks of the 16, and that gives you essentially one, like in this case 4/4 measure, right? Then you can, so that's, maybe pattern 1, and then maybe pattern 2 is like a fill. And so you can then go to compose the song and go, I want 3 bars of pattern 1, I want 1 bar of pattern 2, I want 3 bars of pattern 1, I want 1 pattern of pattern 4, that kind of thing. And I'm really impressed. When they say it's very user-friendly and intuitive, my gosh, is it ever. You can install Hydrogen, and if you've never played an instrument in your life, to include drums, you could figure it out in 10 minutes or less. I mean, it's that easy. Now, one of the things, so Steve was talking about the projects he wants to poke around at while he's at Self. Here's one of the things I'm considering poking around with. They make a device from Akai called the LPD-8, which is a MIDI controller with responsive percussion pads, basically like little finger pads. And so the idea would be that I can plug this in. I checked, supports Linux out of the box, works with Hydrogen. Lots of people are using it, works great, has been for 10 years. A little USB device, you plug it into the laptop, and in theory, if I understand all of this correctly, I should be able to build myself a little tiny drum set that I can play with my fingers, and the audio will come out of my laptop, all powered by open source Linux and Hydrogen. So more as this experiment rolls on. But I found out they have a Guitar Center here in Charlotte, so I'm going to check that out. I'm going to give it a shot. But if you have experience producing music on Linux, I'd love to hear from you. Coming up in the next few weeks, we're going to be doing a music episode on Linux, in part because I'm trying to extract my father from the evil clutches of proprietary software, and I'm doing so by having all of the roads paved for him with open source alternatives. So if that's you, I want to hear I want to hear from you, and I want to hear what works, what doesn't work, and where the challenges are. Steve, are you good addressing some feedback?
Let's do it.
coming in first this week is David. David writes in and says, I'm wanting to separate my firewall off from my Proxmox server. Oh, look at that, Steve. That's what we were just talking about. I'm looking at a Sophos Li5 V3 appliance. I would likely continue with the Sophos Home, but might try OpenSense again. I would use my ID in the standard firewall, but not the decryption mode option, as it doesn't play nicely with our bank and many sites. I likely didn't set it up correctly. I just want to know if it's enough hardware or if I should go another R300 series Power Edge server. I love the show, David. So a couple things. So first of all, I would tell you that I entirely support your venture of moving off of a Proxmox server and onto a dedicated appliance for reasons as indicated at the beginning of the episode. Secondly, as far as will Sophos have enough horsepower? Yeah, you bet. As a basic network appliance, unless you tell me you're hosting a mini data center out of your house and you're going to be streaming live video from 50 different peers, yeah, it should be more than enough. Here, I don't know of that specific model, so I can't tell you it's going to work perfectly out of the box with OpenSense. I haven't tried that. Every Sophos device that I have worked with has essentially been a little Intel box, and I flashed it with pfSense. Now, one word on pfSense, and this is recent as of a few weeks ago. They recently changed the way that they allow you to download pfSense. So instead of being able to go to pfSense.com, just click on download and download an image, you now have to quote-unquote buy pfSense. And so you create an account, you add your billing details so that you can buy, air fingers quote, pfSense. Then you add it to the cart. The checkout price is $0.00. And then once you've made a purchase, then they email you the link and then you're able to download it. Now, to their credit, somebody has taken to the forums to post the direct link that you can go download the ISO. So I guess that's there. But at least at Altispeed Technology, we have stepped up our efforts. It's been in the works for a while to look at OpenSense. It kind of started when they started hassling over virtualizing pfSense to begin with. And so we've all of us, either we run OpenSense at our houses or we're at least playing with it. And with this latest change, it's like, okay, but when I'm in the middle of doing something and I'm neck deep in a problem, the last thing I want to do is go through a cumbersome checkout thing just to get access to the ISO. Just down, it should be domain.com/downloads. I should be able to just download the thing. So we are going to make the migration from pfSense to OpenSense as soon as we get all of it's really making sure that all of the techs are familiar enough with it so they don't get into a client situation and go, well, I don't know how to do this. So we got to work that part out. But I would encourage you to give OpenSense a try. Let me know what you think. If it doesn't work, I have definitely had great luck with pfSense running on the Sophos appliances, and I think they're some of the best boxes for the money. In part because you can buy them used on eBay, and so you get a lot of really fast fabric for pennies on the dime. Steve, your thoughts? I mean, would you think he's on the right track?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure about this particular model. I did just some quick searching and I saw some people posting, quote, nightmare stories. I didn't go any further than that. I just kind of skimmed along. Regarding OpenSense and pfSense, I would eventually probably move over to OpenSense. I've tried in the past and I tried just doing a straight up swap. Now, the my bad part of that story is I should have had two boxes side by side instead of trying to port the config, because you're supposed to just be able to extract your config out of pfSense and port it into OpenSense. There was some stuff that did not translate properly, and I had problems. So if I was going to do this again, I would get a spare box, put OpenSense on it, make sure that everything worked, because I don't want to be in the same situation where I was with Noah, where 7 hours later the internet's still down. Like, I'll take a 2-hour swing at this, and if I can't get OpenSense set up the way I want, I just drop the pfSense box back in place. But eventually working through, this is what my config in OpenSense will look like. I know this works, and it allows me to kind of pick away at it. That was my mistake when I was trying to migrate the first time, and it failed. So that would be my advice to people, is if you're migrating, try and do it with a cheap box first that you're not even going to keep in production. Maybe you even have to buy one of those USB Ethernet dongles just to make something work.
I am going to get... so Sleuth in the chat room says Vios can be configured with Ansible. Might be worth a look. I'm still using it, and I really like it a lot. So I'm going to have to add that to the list of things to check out, too. I am going to link to the XG135. So this is the least expensive option that I have seen available for pfSense/OpenSense. I find it to be incredibly reliable. I really like it. And a friend of mine actually designed a 3D rack mount bracket for it. So if you take a look at this and you say to yourself, I really like the idea, but I just need the ability to rack mount it, you can do that. It has all the ports in the back and actually works pretty darn well. So we'll have that link for you in the show notes. Any of the things that are better than that, so to speak, will work well. I haven't had any issue with the higher end Sophos. It's really just the lower end ones that are potentially a problem, and even then tends to work pretty well. Stephen Hewells. He is the Vice President and General Managers for the AI Business Unit here at Red Hat and guest this hour on the Ask Noah Show. Welcome into the program, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking the time to be here. So I think most of our listeners know what Podman is. Can you talk to me a little bit about Podman AI? What is it? How does it work?
So Podman AI builds on the success we've really had with Podman, right? As an interface where users are able to quickly download, get access to individual containers. And in this case, though, like we're optimizing those containers for AI. So for customers who are looking, or for individual users who are looking to get started with AI, we have integrations with Podman AI that have models preloaded. They're able to download those containers, start playing with them, generate interest, and then go into production from there. So it's really targeted at that early adoption experimentation lifecycle to really test out ideas and pilot them before moving into a bigger implementation.
So obviously, depending on what I'm doing with AI is going to vary widely with what model I use. What kind of customizations are available for swapping out some of those models on the back end if I wanted to use Llama or others? Does that exist?
It does exist. So there's a number of different variants within Podman. It is community driven, right? So within Podman AI, if there are community users who would like to see a variant that doesn't exist today and you want to get started with a Llama 3 or maybe something that hasn't been contributed, you can contribute it. Today, we announced the availability of InstructLab and Granite, being able to work with those inside Podman. And so now we get into a world where not only can users experiment with the model itself, but then if they'd like to see changes in that model through InstructLab, they have the ability to contribute that data, so whether it's their knowledge or skills, back up to the Granite community and have that model retrained and implemented over time.
Very cool. Can you talk to me a little bit about Stability AI and your collaboration with them?
Yeah, this is a great one. So on the OpenShift AI side, we provide a lot of the common components for customers, whether they're looking to do model development, model tuning, distributed training, model serving, lifecycle, and management. But we always know, like in the AI world, there's a need for composability. No single vendor can give everything across the board. And that's very true in the model space. Like we've seen an explosion of models being made available, whether they're like permissive license or like what we've done with Granite, but also from special vendors. So with Stability AI, the integration we've announced today really allows customers to have the ability to bring Stability AI models into their OpenShift AI platform to quickly spin them up and then be able to integrate those into applications or to experiment with them further and tune them for their needs. So it's really designed to get you up and running quick and in production.
Can you talk a little bit about the various different Stability AI models, and does it cover all of them? Things like images and text.
It does. Stability offers a wide range, and like the one they're probably most known for has to do with image. Like that was the one that caught on very early on, but they do a wide variety with text as well, which can handle a number of use cases, right? So when we start looking at like image analysis, this caters to a lot of the market. When we look at like factories looking to take images for defect analysis, and then everyone knows the power of LLMs. Everyone's trying to build a chat bot or integrate that into their customer service applications. So they really are able to handle a wide spectrum of use cases out there.
So kind of talking about that, AI is obviously all over Red Hat. Red Hat is very focused on it. You're seeing a lot of it at the summit this year. Can you talk about how your efforts integrate or correlate with some of the other efforts around the larger Red Hat effort towards AI?
This is a good one. So in a lot of ways, we announced OpenShift AI last year. at Summit. But from an AI perspective, we've actually been heading down this path for well over 8 or 9 years now. I joined Red Hat 9 years ago. I know I've been doing it since the day I showed up. And back then, it really was about providing the capabilities in our core platforms needed to run AI workloads. So that means in RHEL, we wanted to make sure we had hardware acceleration so customers could get access to GPUs for any of their workloads. In OpenShift, it meant we wanted to have the right scaling and scheduling profile for AI workloads on containers to optimize training and inference. And then over time, like, we actually launched an open source project called Open Data Hub. That is what became OpenShift AI. Its initial intent was to demonstrate, if you can believe it or not, like at some point in time, customers didn't really believe that Kubernetes was an optimal platform for AI ML workloads. So we developed and contributed to the Open Data Hub as a means, as a reference point for customers to look at, to be able to see that you could run an AI as a service platform on Kubernetes. That got such interest and adoption and demand that we ultimately rolled that and became OpenShift AI. Now, from there, OpenShift AI actually is the training and serving platform for the models that go into our Lightspeed brand of products. So when you think about Ansible Lightspeed, the Watson Code Assistant model that's powering Ansible Lightspeed is actually trained using OpenShift AI, and it's served using OpenShift AI. So we have a very nice lineage inheritance across all of the platforms.
I'm glad you brought up the Open Data Hub. Can you talk a little bit about the Open Data Hub, what it is, and your work with it?
It is. So this is a one that's near and dear to my heart. So myself and 2 others at Red Hat were kind of the founders of this thing. And when it started, we really did focus on, back then, like the focus was really on training, right? Yeah. So it was a Jupyter Notebook environment. We put together a couple of components, allowed for like data integration using various Spark interfaces, and then be able to do model serving. It wasn't too advanced back then, but it gives customers the ability to like incubate a model and then roll it into production. From there, though, we started plugging in more and more capabilities. We started to see other communities pop up. So Kubeflow community started to mature in the space, and others. So we started contributing there and pulling components, with the idea being that customers wanted an AI as a service platform. Yeah. They all needed a core foundation, just like they needed for containers and applications with RHEL back in the day. They needed all that core plumbing to be able to deploy and enable AI applications across their enterprise. That's what we were really targeting. Like, what are those core interfaces? Where do we see the common entry points? And where do we see the common integration points with our ecosystem? So the idea really was just to give that core set of capabilities to customers.
Do you see an opportunity for Red Hat to be pivotal from the standpoint that all of these technologies exist and are leveraged by Red Hats to the point that when AI, I don't want to say comes out because that makes it sound like it just overnight appeared, and in reality it's been in development for a long time, but as these things come prominently to market, Red Hat is in, I would think, a better position than a lot of other companies to say, here's our offering, here we go, we'll make it available as a service, because you have all the underpinnings, you have the operating system, you got the containers, you have the scalability, all the stuff around it exists, and now it's just, this is what the customer needs, great, this is your flavor.
It is, and I love to hear you say that. This is something I say a lot, in that it used to be we'd get a lot of questions of like, well, what does Red Hat have to say about the AI space? But my approach was always what you said, like, a bulk of the innovation happening around AI is happening in open source. A lot of the work we put into RHEL and into OpenShift plays a pivotal role in providing the core platform for these AI ML workloads. That combination made it a logical extension for a point for us to get into the AI platform space. And now, like what you're seeing, like when foundation models first came out, there were very few options. All of them were proprietary. But then in the last year, you've seen this massive explosion in more permissive models that are more open. And so it was just a natural extension for us to get into the open source model space with IBM Research and what we announced around Granite, and now to help with some of the methodologies around tuning and training those models as well. So I agree, like this is just on the natural spectrum of development for us.
What do you need? Today it's available as a service. Talk to me about Red Hat's OpenShift Data Sciences Cloud Services. What is that?
So that's an interesting one. Okay, so back to like the story around Open Data Hub. Yeah. When we first brought Open Data Hub to market, generative AI, I'm sure companies were building it, but the primary workload was more what we would call predictive AI, right? Traditional regression analysis, things that have been in the market for a long, long time. When we first launched Open Data Hub as a product, we launched it as a cloud service called OpenShift Data Science. It was primarily targeted at those predictive AI use cases. When we saw the takeoff in generative AI, we realized we had all the core plumbing already for not only a predictive AI platform, but also we can handle generative AI as well. And so that's what then led to the launch of OpenShift AI last year at Summit. We were able to extend what had started as the OpenShift Data Science platform, add additional integrations and capabilities to not only serve predictive models, but also serve generative AI models and train and tune them as well. Yeah. And so now, what was OpenShift Data Science is all encompassed in OpenShift AI plus more. And OpenShift AI is offered as a cloud service as well.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference for somebody who isn't aware of predictive AI versus generative AI?
Yeah, this one comes up. So predictive AI is, I've been doing this since I graduated college many, many years ago. And back then we just called it advanced analytics, right? So these are the traditional things that you've probably interacted with if you've ever picked up a cell phone, right? It's the weather prediction app that's telling you the likelihood of a terrain. It's your browsing and shopping and you're getting a next best recommended product based on what you've shopped before. It's the things that are predicting risk, whether in financial services, they're fraud detectors. It's those traditional models that were built based on customer data that are targeted at specific use cases. Now with generative AI, what we're seeing is more something that's actually still based on data, much broader set of data, much more complex algorithms, but it's able to take information and generate its own outputs. So it's maybe less deterministic than what you would get in the old predictive models, but it opens up a wide variety of opportunities for customers to interact with them because of the nature of the content it produces. And what we see really is in a lot of customer use cases where they're actually combining where they were getting value out of their predictive systems with now generative systems. So those might be customer service applications where we always knew the next best action to recommend to a customer, but now generative AI can take that result and put it into a more user context friendly, verb or vocalization. Sorry, that was a terrible right there. So a lot of them they're used in a complementary fashion.
One of the things that we're asking everybody this year, can you talk to me a little bit about what you think the best thing about open source is, and what does the term open source mean to you?
Yeah, the thing I love about open source is really the rate of innovation that you end up seeing. By nature, I'm a builder, right? So before I could ever write code, I worked with wood, I worked with electrical systems, I worked with speakers and home audio. I loved building things that mattered. And I always did it in concert with people who were more knowledgeable than me. And when you look at open source, this is what happens in these communities. You have people who are very well versed in open source, have been doing it for years. But with an AI space, you're getting all these new entrants who are just interested in AI and maybe haven't been exposed to open source. And we're creating this whole new generation and exposing them to open source. That's going to drive this innovation forward. And I think that's what we're seeing the result of. When you look at the pace of change that's happening in open source around AI, it's fueled by this passion and innovation that's coming from new entrants into the market, as combining with those that have been here for a long time. So for me, it really does represent probably the future of where technology is going.
Stephen Hewells, he is the Vice President and General Manager of the AI Business Unit here at Red Hat, a guest this hour on the Ask Noah Show. Stephen, we appreciate the time. We'll get you back on the program soon.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Southeast Linux Fest coming up this weekend. A couple things to be aware of. First of all, the meetup. It'll be at Pinky's West Side Grill at 1600 West Moorhead Street in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hope to see you there Friday, June 7th at 6 p.m. Then talks. Steve's going to be giving a talk about VMs in containers. And again, you want to talk about doing things in a very simple way. It's the way to do it. I'm going to be giving two presentations. One, open sourcing them all, as well as Matrix as a way to reach people where they're at. The live shows. Ask Noah Show will have a stream every morning from 9 to 10 o'clock. That's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. A Reg Chew, the Retro Reg Chew, will be 6 p.m. Central Friday night. And then Ask Noah Show live Saturday at 6 p.m. Central. Music in my ears means we're out of time. You want to follow us for the latest on Twitter at Ask Noah Show. He's at Linux Ovens. I'm at Colonel Linux. We'll be back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central. AskNoahShow.com. Have a good week.